Heina Dadabhoy spent her childhood as a practicing Muslim who never in her right mind would ever have believed that she would grow up to be an atheist, feminist, secular activist. My favorite description of her is actually her Twitter bio, that says, has all the sincerity and ambition of Leslie Knope, powered by the self-absorption and cheese addiction of Liz Lemon. Intersectional queer feminist plus ex-Muslim atheist. Give it up for Heina Dadabhoy.
Apologies to any vegans out there. I don't require cheese consumption to be at this talk, so don't worry. This is actually, I thought, a good representation of what I'm going to talk about because, as my bio says, I was raised a practicing Muslim, and now I'm very much not. You can see my arms, see? Very much not a practicing Muslim. This is the website for ex-Muslims of North America. And when people hear the term ex-Muslim, they think of Ayaan Hirsi Ali or, Ibn Sina or any of those people. And so they assume, if you're an out ex-Muslim, you must be under some sort of threat or something like that. And while that, of course, is a problem for a lot of ex-Muslims, there are a lot of us now. There are too many of us for all of us to be fatwa'd. There's just, and honestly, if you look at Ayaan Hirsi Ali versus someone like me, she's a prominent politician. I'm just some girl from California with a blog. So that's what's going on. So as this becomes more and more of a thing and more Muslims question their faith and feel more comfortable expressing their doubts and even coming to the conclusion of their doubts with a lack of faith, this will become more and more of an issue in terms of making secular spaces a little bit more aware and a little bit more welcoming of ex-Muslims. So the title, I get a lot of questions about that. If you have a better idea for a title, let me know. A Murtid is the Arabic term for an apostate, a person who believed in Islam and left Islam. You won't hear many of us using that term very often. We usually just say ex-Muslim. It's a little easier. And in Islam, an apostate is specifically somebody who accepted Islam and then renounced it and never recanted that renouncement. And according to Islamic law, if you're an apostate, you're pretty much guaranteed to go to hell. But if you were never born into Islam, there is a slight chance that Allah might forgive you and let you go to heaven. So those of you out there who have never been Muslim, you have more of a chance of getting into Muslim heaven than I do. I don't know if you'd want to go there. There's actually a movement in Islam right now, and especially like with the internet and people being able to talk to each other, there is movement towards being more progressive Muslims and reforming Islam and getting people to have a more open mind within Islam. And bless those people. I can't do it. I left it behind. But I feel like we should make spaces more open to those kinds of people because often they are questioning on some level. That's because being an openly questioning Muslim is a very rare thing to be. Mainstream Sunni Islam stopped doing interpretation in the 11th century. What happened was there was this movement towards, there was allegedly like invasions of ideas and physical invasions. And so this one scholar decided, we're done interpreting. We're going to do analogies instead. So they do qiyas, which means analogical reasoning. Imagine trying to do an analogy to figure out if stem cell research is allowed in Islam or not. So you're taking stuff 11th century and before, and you're trying to figure out modern issues. It's very difficult. So you get this sort of weird stalling that goes on in Sunni Islam. Shia Islam isn't necessarily much better. They do more interpretations, but interpretations are limited to a select group of people. There is a lot of heterodoxy inherent in the one true Islam idea. Muslims themselves will say, there is one true Islam, everyone follows the same thing, there's one Quran, there's one God, etc., etc. Not true. You see Islam manifesting itself in many different ways across different countries, cultures, and individuals. But that sort of contributes to this idea that Muslims shouldn't question because, there is one true Islam. There's also colonialist and immigrant defensiveness. With colonialism came this sort of backlash, or in the post-colonialist world, rather, there's this backlash against this idea that Europeans have all the answers. People in Muslim countries will say, well, we don't have to follow what they believe. We can have our own beliefs, but unfortunately, those beliefs sometimes go back to more literalist interpretations, perhaps even more literal than people in the past, although we don't necessarily know whether that's true or false. And the immigrant defensiveness comes, I have a lot of experience with this. When I was 5 years old was when my family became really religious. Before that, they kind of practiced, they kind of didn't. But they come to the United States, they look around, and they hear news reports about 12-year-old pregnant crack whores, and then they worry that their children will end up like that. And so they decide to sort of buckle down and become even more conservative than they would have been back home. I have cousins in those Muslim countries who are far less conservative than my family. The SSA and other secular groups can be a place where people who are questioning Islam could come and can discuss and not be afraid to be outed or shunned or stuff like that. One thing that I think we need to really be aware of when it comes to secular groups and ex-Muslims and questioning Muslims is we love talking about religious privilege. We love talking about how, theists are privileged and they get to have a community and they get to have a platform. A lot of what we call religious privilege is not religious privilege. It is mainstream Christian privilege. Being a Muslim does not afford you much privilege in the United States, let me tell you. I was a headscarf wearing girl post 9/11. It was not fun. It's actually somewhat easier now that I don't wear a hijab. But, if you think about issues that we care about, things like 10 Commandments monuments, there's no 10 Commandments in the Quran. You also hear about Islamic groups partaking in civil rights fights with groups like the ACLU. The ACLU, meanwhile, is viewed by Christians as a sort of anti-religious group. So you see how being part of a minority religious group doesn't give you religious privilege at all. And as I mentioned, being an American Muslim is tough. I can bore you with all my sob stories, but I would say that the story that probably encapsulates this the best is what happened at my hometown mosque. I was born and raised in Irvine, California, fairly, not necessarily financially progressive, but definitely racially progressive sort of city. University of California, Irvine is there. That's where I went. And long after I left Islam, like a couple of years after, my cousin came over to my house and was talking to my mother and said, this weirdo showed up at the mosque and he kept harassing everyone and we didn't know what was going on. And he kept talking about terrorism, so we called the FBI and reported him. And I remember thinking, that's very odd. It turned out he was an FBI operative. He was a plant. They took a guy, a former felon, who called up the FBI and said, I think this mosque has terrorism. I think I can get them to admit to terrorism. And they said, sure, we'll pay you to go to this mosque and try to stir up some trouble. And so he went to the mosque and started stirring up trouble. Now, if he knew anything, he wouldn't have picked the most progressive mosque in the area. He would have picked, one of those other ones. Maybe someone shady was over there, but there was no one shady at that mosque. That mosque had agreed to work with the FBI on this issue. And so when someone started talking about terrorism, some random guy who showed up, of course they called the FBI. And the first hint to it was when they called the FBI about it, they didn't even ask for the guy's name. They said, it's fine, we're on it. So everyone knew, okay, something weird is going on. There was actually an episode of This American Life on it, by the way, if you're ever curious to find out more. They dug really deep into it. But that sort of encapsulates what it's like to be a Muslim in the United States post 9/11. As patriotic, as cooperative as you can be, there's always this level of suspicion. So it's definitely not fun or privileged. And a lot of what I would call anti-Muslim bigotry doesn't go away when you apostate. I left Islam, and still, street preachers would show up on my campus, and when I would try to engage with them as an atheist, they would ask me questions like, is your family Muslim or are they American? So, that stuff doesn't go away. I still feel like I get side-eyed at the airport, and I travel a lot now for these things. Although the one time I didn't get side-eyed a lot at the airport, I was wearing atheist gear, so maybe I should start doing that more. People are sure that I'm not one of those horrible terrorists. So I guess I could get into a little bit of the practical matters. So we know the theory that, ex-Muslims face a lot of challenges. Muslims face a lot of challenges, both from within and without Islam. But what can we do to help? This sounds really, really basic when you think about it, but the general principle is to respect individual identities. We need to actively and proactively avoid stereotypes and generalizing. So we all know that. We're all not supposed to be racist. We're all supposed to be open-minded and all that. But putting that into practice is a little bit different. When it comes to minority groups, a lack of exposure sort of naturally leads to some degree of stereotyping. Because if you've only met one person or two people from a particular group, or you've only read one book or a couple of news articles about some group, you're going to associate certain qualities with that group and all members of that group, despite the fact that that might not be the case. It's almost impossible for any of us here to truly believe that every single Christian believes in purity balls. Despite the fact that purity balls are getting a lot of coverage right now, no one looks at every Christian and says, oh, you probably are selling off your daughter's virginity with a wedding ring. Nobody's going to think that. Nobody's going to feel that way. But with Muslims, you hear about one honor killing, and suddenly I have random people asking me if my dad tried to honor kill me. And no, he didn't. My parents love me. Thank you very much. And it's more true for ex-Muslims than Muslims because there's only a handful of ex-Muslims that people have heard of. The people I mentioned before, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Ali Sina, and people like that. They have all had their lives very seriously threatened. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single ex-Muslim has. I've gotten some threats, but honestly, the anti-feminist atheist bros are way worse than the Muslims. That's where I get the most vitriol and backlash. And the more credible backlash. Because if someone in Saudi Arabia tweets at me saying, die, heathen scum, whatever, but if some dude who might come to a conference I might be at says, I'm going to, do something horrible to you, that's a lot scarier. That's a lot more of a real threat to me. And that sort of leads into my next point, which is that you should trust ex-Muslims to know our own situation. I get a lot of really, really well-meaning, often older people tweeting at me, and bless their hearts. But when my New York Times article came out a couple of weeks ago, I was profiled in it after Women in Secularism. I had so many people tweeting at me saying, be careful. And I wanted to ask them, what do you mean by that? But I knew exactly what they meant. And so my only reply was, I've been out as an atheist for 8 years now. I think I'll be okay. I really do. And so it's sort of condescending to assume that you know our situation better than we do and that you are qualified to issue us warnings. That's sort of, it seems like a nice thing to do, but it's not necessarily the most helpful. This also applies to situations where the ex-Muslim experience diverges from other people's experiences. So if you know a closeted ex-Muslim, it might be tempting to say, oh, come out, it'll be fine. It may not be fine for them. Or, on the other hand, saying, don't come out because it won't be fine, that may not be the case. There's also issues with family. For me, personally, I care about my family. I want to maintain a relationship with my family. Throwing up middle fingers at my family and storming off in a haze of self-righteousness is just not something that I want to do. I don't want to lose them. And so when I talk about issues with my family, I get a lot of people who essentially say, oh, just cut them off, disown them, leave them, who needs them? You have a chosen family now. That's not something that I'm interested in. So, some people may not want to keep relations with their biological family, but I do. There are also issues of identity. When I left Islam, I didn't just leave a religion behind. I left behind a lifestyle. I left behind a community. I left behind my entire world. All of my goals in life, my education, what I planned to do with myself, how I dressed, how I ate, where I went, where I traveled even, was so contingent on my Muslim identity. I would pick things that would be more Sharia compliant, essentially. I picked being a teacher as a profession. I'm not a teacher, but back then I wanted to be a teacher because that way I could be a mother as well and take summers off and take care of my kids and things like that. So leaving Islam behind meant leaving an identity behind, and it's not always easy to do that. And that also might mean, because people in Islam sort of often, not always, isolate themselves from certain parts of culture, it also means I don't get everybody's references. It's a little bit better now, but for a while it was hard, and sometimes people would tease me about it, and teasing can be well-meaning or, sweet. But at the same time, it can get a little grating. Sorry I haven't seen every movie made between 1990 and, now. That's not only true for ex-Muslims, it's also true for ex-Mormons as well, often. So another thing that comes up, and I might personally have a hand in perpetuating this myth, is the idea that ex-Muslims are your personal knowledge dispensers. I like being everybody's personal knowledge dispenser. I like it when people ask me questions. I'm writing a book for this reason. Not all ex-Muslims. Some of them just want to live and let live. Some of them maybe even be triggered to trauma by being asked about their Muslim past. So just because someone is formerly from a religion that you're interested in talking about doesn't mean that they necessarily want to talk about it. Generally, if we want to talk about it, we'll probably let you know. I certainly do. Some ex-Muslims may not even have been devout enough to know about Islam. I know an ex-Muslim who's really excited about my book because he doesn't know much about Islam and wants to learn too. Sometimes it's a cultural thing too. The first time I heard of female genital mutilation, I didn't know what it was. And when someone told me it was a Muslim thing, I went home and asked my mother. I was probably like 13 or 14. And I said, "Hey, Mom, I heard about this thing that's supposedly Islamic." And she looked at me and said, "Actually, that's not allowed in Islam." I'm like, "Really? Then how's it an Islamic thing?" So yeah, it depends on the culture and the background. There are a lot of people, including me, but not exclusively me, who can help you with your curiosity about Islam and are happy to do so. You can talk to me later if you want specific names. Also, sort of on a related note, don't treat us as personal annoyance receivers. Honestly, I really, really could die happy without ever having some random person come up to me and says, "Muhammad was such a pedo, am I right?" Like, okay, yeah, okay. I'm not saying that child brides are a good thing or a thing that we shouldn't be upset by, but really, that's the best you have. I'm tired of hearing it. There are lots of things to criticize in Islam. And I have a lot of feelings about Aisha that I don't have the time to share because I got my 5-minute warning. Also, respect our privacy. That's especially important for ex-Muslims because we often don't have the luxury to be as out as other people. So, if you take a picture, don't tag it or post it without permission, just things like that. And respect our boundaries in general. Some of us take a while to get away from Islamic practices. I know some ex-Muslims who have been out of Islam for 10 years and haven't drank alcohol or eaten pork. Shoving bacon in their faces is not a helpful tactic. Some of them even go vegan, so, no bacon there. All right, so I actually do want to leave some time for Q&A, so I'm just going to cut off my information a little bit. You can always find me on the internet. I'm really easy to find. You just Google my first name. I'm right there. I even have an Ask a Fem account, so if you want to anonymously ask a question that you're embarrassed to ask, go for it. But I think I want to have some time for Q&A. Please keep it brief so I can answer your questions and as many as possible. And I'm always available. I'm always around at cons. I don't mind talking to people. So let's have your questions. Yes?
That's a random question. What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, heinous dealings.
Thank you.
Spelled exactly as it should be. Yes?
What are your feelings on non-Muslims, especially white non-Muslims, who criticize women who wear headscarves as being oppressed?
First of all, if they're actually oppressed, why are you criticizing them? I find that really annoying when they do that. Secondly, not all of them are oppressed. People have different reasons. Cultural contexts are very different. If you go to Iran, where they are actually mostly forced to wear it, yeah, that's a problem. But if you're talking about Muslim women in the United States, chances are they're wearing it by choice. I certainly did. Well, choice in the sense that I thought that I was going to get punished in hell for it. But my dad wasn't shoving it on my head. My dad actually refused to allow me to cover my face. He thought it was too extreme. I wanted to do it because I wanted to go to a higher place in heaven. So it's a lot more nuanced than that. And like I said, it goes back to the stereotyping thing, where you hear one story and you think it applies to everybody, and it doesn't always. Green shirt. Yes. Or is it blue shirt? I'm sorry.
Oh, green shirt. I thought you said creature.
No. Don't start rumors here.
I didn't know I was a creature. I'm sorry. What are the most extreme
of when someone decides they want to become an ex-Muslim.
So basically, the worst situation that's occurred because someone left Islam.
Yes.
You hear similar things with women, even who just decide not to wear a headscarf or who decide to date. You know, there was a case in Canada where these two girls stopped wearing a headscarf and their father ran them over with his car. Things like that do happen. People get disowned a lot. That's probably the most common extreme thing. Or forced to immigrate or sentenced to death in certain countries. It really varies on where you are and who you are as well. And how public you are, really. One more. Make it good, no pressure. Okay. Okay. Okay, both of you were saying the other. One of you needs to ask a question.
All right, I just wanted to say that September the 13th, the ex-Muslims of North America are having a picnic with Hispanic American freethinkers together in Washington, D.C. So if you're in September 13th around Washington, D.C., be a nice thing to come and enjoy.
You know, DC is a great place to be an ex-Muslim. So many members of that. When I was at Women in Secularism, we had a party, and it was just amazing. But alas, nobody likes to organize in California. That seriously is a problem. I've tried to start groups of all kinds. That's a story for another day.
Organize in California, talk to me. Make something happen.